What I now want to do is take query data and output it onto the page. So that's what I'm going to set up. And in order to do that, I'm going to open up the Build Query page. I'm also going to open up the Output Query page. The Output Query page is going to display my results. And the reason I want the Build Query page is so that I don't have to retype my query. So on the Building a Query page, I'm going to copy my query code, go over to my Output Query, and paste it. Now I have my cursor between a paragraph tag, and that really doesn't make sense because all I'm doing is running a query on a database, and then ColdFusion has the database information. I'm not putting it onto the page at all. And quite often, you want the query to run before the page begins to be put together. So what I'm going to do is place this query up at the very top of the page above the doc type, so that the first thing to run is going to be my query. And I'll clean up this extra space here just a little bit, make my code a little bit neater so that it's easier for you to see what's going on. As I'm building my pages, it's a good plan to always clean things up that you may see. Now I'm going to run my query, but notice this query only has a data source attribute. I have no way to reference it. So this query needs a name, and I'm going to reference it as QTours. So I'll give my query a name called QTours. Now, when I go to output that content, I have a way to reference it. So down below this H1, I do have these two P tags. And what I'm going to say is pound QTours.record count, because that is the number of records that are being returned. And I will say records returned from the QTours query. Okay, so I have the number of records being returned. Now what I need to do is actually put the information within this area. And because I want to output it onto the page, I'm going to use the CF output tag. So there's my CF output tag opening, and I will do my closing as well. You can see how CF Builder kind of pops it right back into the left there. And I'm going to output my query within this tag. So how do I do that? Well, I reference it using pound signs, QTours dot, and then I reference it based on the actual column in the database. So let me reference tour name first. Then I'm going to put a break in here. And next, I will do tour description. So I'll put my pound sign, QTours dot. Wait for this to pop up. You can see there's a slight delay there. Tour description. Add my closing pound sign. For some reason, it didn't get added there. So that is something to watch. And I will do the same thing. Pound QTours dot. The last one is total days. Put in my pound sign. And here's my break. Now I technically don't need a break. I'll leave it off of that last one. So here is my CF output tag. Now this break is an error. So I'll go ahead and fix that. Let's take a look at what happens when I run this query. Now you can see my record count value was not pulled out. I see my pound signs on the page. And that's one of the most common errors when you get used to working with ColdFusion. If this happens where you see your ColdFusion code, what that means is nothing is processing the value of that. And that's because we don't have a CF output tag surrounding it. So let me go back to source. And the first thing I want to do is move my opening CF output tag. I'm going to click and drag it above the record count. Anything inside the CF output, what you're doing is telling ColdFusion to process that information. Now that I have that set up, get rid of the space here, and let's take a look. I'll save that. Go back into Firefox. Now look what happened. There's only one query record being returned. The reason for that is within my CF output, it's only running once. So the first record returned from this tours query is the only thing that's showing on the page. The way you get around that is in your CF output tag, notice there's a query attribute. And what I do here is tell it which query to output. What that is going to do is tell ColdFusion, keep running this until there are no more queries. And I will go ahead and put this inside a paragraph tag. And I'll put the closing paragraph tag here. Now, sometimes it can get difficult to kind of see what's going on. If you find this font is a little bit too small to be able to view easily, there is a way to be able to enlarge the font. But let's run this query first. I'll go ahead and save, put it into Firefox, and now you can see I'm getting all of my query records returned, but I'm also getting this repeated over and over and over each time. That's because every time it runs the query, it's also running my record count. And this is an example of an area needing its own CF output tag. So what I'm going to do is take the CF output above, move it back down to where I started with it. And this qtours.recordCount needs its own CF output tag. And I'm going to let CF Builder wrap that for me. This little, what looks like a computer monitor, if I have something selected and I click that, you can see it adds that code for me, which is really handy. I'll save. We'll put this back into the browser one more time. And now you can see each individual query is listed, the 3 pieces of information, and the number of records is only listed once. So that is how you can output a query. You use the CF output tag with the query attribute that lists the name of the query, and that code will keep running for every record returned from the query, and it will be placed onto the page exactly as you reference it within that CF output tag. So that is how you can output data to a web page from a query.